When Britain's town and city planners decided that high-rise living was the thing, the answer to too many people trying to occupy too little land, they created another crime wave. These monsters became prime targets for the criminals, and in many parts of the country they have now been or are being knocked down, demolished. But not in Grimsby on Humberside. These tower blocks used to be known as Hell's Towers. The level of crime really was that bad.
When I first came on this estate, it was like a rat hole. That's putting it rather timidly.
When you came in, you didn't know what to expect. You could be mugged, you could have your telephone switched off the wall.
The vandals were putting the hose pipes from the landing that was there for fire. They were putting them through people's letterboxes and washing the flats out. It was really chaos.
There certainly was a crime problem. It wasn't isolated to hijinks by young people. From the police perspective, when we attended, officers were worried about reprisals of their own safety, and often then we would have to send 2 or 3 cars to deal with perhaps a relatively minor incident.
By the time we reached the 1980s, the quality of life for residents in this area was getting particularly poor. We were suffering major acts of crime and vandalism, and arson attacks were very, very prevalent indeed. In fact, it became a standing joke that the fire brigade spent more time here than in the local fire station. Like many councils, we came to a conclusion that something had to be done, and we set about it with the 2 options. One was demolition, which we couldn't really afford to lose the housing stock in those numbers. The other was to reinvent the word high-rise living to be acceptable. And it just so happened at that time I was in Spain on holiday and also in Florida, where I saw high-rise living of very high class and standards within those blocks. I came back to Grimsby and decided that's what we wanted. Hello, Pendry.
Hello, David. You all right?
Yes, how's things?
Not bad at all.
Lovely. That's how they should be. That's how they should be.
Usual, correct.
And the good news was that the council did indeed agree to keep the blocks of flats, but change completely the image of them and the sense, once and for all, that it was not an ordinary block of council flats. The entrance and concierge arrangements that you see here are, as far as I know, unique. That they are designed out of the brief that we gave the architects with one simple message, and that was to make this into a 5-star hotel, giving the residents that were going to be living here the impression of comfort, class and style from which all else would flow. We completely altered both the ground floor and the top floor, smartened up all the corridors, new lifts, modernised every flat individually, and the total cost of that was about £2 million.
Jack, I've got Mr. Hopkinson to see you. Can he see
Grimsby not only refurbished the 6 tower blocks, they also installed an unusually complex electronic security system and more than 50 CCTV cameras.
One of the major elements of the refurbishment was that if we were going to invest, we had to secure that investment. We had to make it last. Probably no more than about £200,000 went on the 55 CCTV cameras and the door entry control systems for not just this block but the other 5 blocks of the whole estate. We created a very secure system whereby it no longer was the province of vandals, it was secure, and the only people with entry opportunity into these blocks was the residents themselves and authorised visitors. If you want to go any further into the building, you have to place your fob in front of this electronic unit, and this will enable this door lock to be open for you to come into the lift lobby area. And again, we are on camera, we're being monitored all the time.
In each block, you've got a camera at the front door, a camera in the foyer, 1 in each of the lifts. There's also 4 rooftop cameras which scan the estate, and we've got 4 cameras in Comber Place. Now they are being taped 24 hours a day. So even if we're not actually watching a camera at that time, it is still on tape. It's not very often the police come round now because the cameras have done the job and people don't commit the same crimes that there was doing a few years ago.
The costs of vandalism and repairs to vandal activity was horrendous. There was many an occasion when the fire brigade would be called out to this block, probably 3 or 4 times of an evening, for fires and lifts being put out of action. Those costs in those days were horrendous. So all we've done now is simply utilising that money to maintain the standards and levels of security we have here now. And at the end of the day, I'm quite satisfied that it's costing us no more than it did in the late 80s.
The tower block CCTV is also used to fight crime outside the estate, to direct Grimsby police to potentially serious incidents. Here, a camera picks up a teenager with a chainsaw. A week later, the same boy is caught by the cameras again, this time with a pair of kitchen knives. The CCTV was even able to capture the moment when the police came to take him away. He was later found to be under the influence of cannabis and other drugs.
We've actually been able to monitor crimes taking place, catch people at the time, and the successful detection of those has acted as an additional deterrent. 5 years ago or more, we were attending priority responses here to deal with particular emergencies or serious incidents. That now isn't the case. Our primary role here is as community policemen.
From the time we created this security system and the manning within this block, we suddenly realised a few months ago that we'd been going 5 years and we hadn't heard ourselves of any crime or vandalism attempts. So we canvassed each and every resident as to whether they had witnessed or been involved in any incidents. And we were very pleased to find that no one had.
It's that safe nowadays, you can go to bed and leave your front. Well, I shouldn't say that really, should I? Because it's tempting things.
I wouldn't move, not whatsoever would I move unless I'm carried out in a pine box. Simple as that.
I think there's a huge impatience with the amount of crime which really damages people's quality of life, and we really want to do something about it. But that worries me, it can go 2 ways. It can either go into a sort of heavy punitiveness, you know, lock the horrible people up and keep them, throw away the key and keep them there, without being very rational about it or thinking, well, we're only getting 2% of them caught, you know, so will that solve it? And you know, that sort of tabloid-fuelled punitiveness is part of the result of the anger. But a more rational output of the anger is, let's join together to do all the preventive things that we can do, we do know about, have been shown work.
Also always at risk from criminals are the very young, especially toddlers. Over the years, I've all too often had to reveal heartbreaking news of crimes against children. And it's clear that most disappearances or attacks happen within a short distance of schools. Youngsters on their way to the classroom or coming home from it. In the suburbs of Cardiff, they believe they've got a scheme which gives immediate refuge to school children who think they are being threatened. Certain homes display a yellow safe house sticker in their window, indicating to the child that it's a safe place to run to.
If you're hurt or someone's following you, you can go to the house with a sticker on it and they'll call the police.
If my mum didn't pick me up because my mum was in work and I fell over and there was no plasters in the school, when I went home I would knock on the safety house door and they would open it, and if I had a cut knee, then they would put a plaster on it and then phone the police, and then the police would phone my mum and dad's work, and then my mum and dad would come and pick me up.
The freedom from the children has been taken away because we don't let them walk to school on their own no more because we're frightened they're going to be picked up or attacked. If this gets off now, we'll be able to send them on their own and know that there is help out there for them.
If you feel unsafe and somebody had followed you from, like say you went over Tesco for your mum and somebody had followed you all the way, you should go to the safety house, tell them, then when the police come you can describe the people.
Safety House originated in a suburb of Melbourne, Australia, in 1979. It was formed by a group of concerned parents because there had been a number of reports of children being approached by strangers within a 3-month period. and obviously they were quite concerned about it and got together, and I thought it was such a marvellous idea that on my return to this country and rejoin the police force, I thought I'd have a bash at trying to get the scheme up and running here. The basic idea of the safety house is for the children on their way to and from school. If they are in any forms of danger whatsoever, then they know that they can easily recognise the house that's displaying the safety house sign, and they know by knocking on the door that the people there have been checked out and the people are good, safe people.
When PC Tucker first approached me about the scheme, I must admit initially I needed some convincing that it was viable and that people would go for it. I had several meetings with him. I looked at a lot of the literature that PC Tucker had provided, and I could see that there was most certainly a space within the community for such a scheme. Obviously, children are very vulnerable. The householders are vetted to ensure that they're suitable to become safety householders, and the children, through a program of teaching, are taught how to use the houses in the event of them before any danger.
They have to be kind people, and they have to, you know, not work, because if you knock on the door and they're not there, you could, you know, still be in trouble.
If you're being followed by and you're frightened, you could go to a safety house and they'll help you.
It's as simple as that. We don't ask the safety householders to do much apart from ring the police.
You don't need no qualifications, you just need to be kind and caring. If a child knocks my door and it's been, well, I won't question the child. If a child just says, can I come in? I will bring the child in, assess the situation, phone the police, and they will advise from there.
I already have approximately 27 houses up and running, as it were, as safety houses, with another 23 that I'm in the process of vetting the residents.
The police have got to go there first to check, like, if the people are kind or are they nasties, and if they're kind and they want to be a safety house person, they become a safety house person.
But how sure can the authorities be that their safe houses are just that, completely safe, that the stickers haven't fallen into the wrong hands?
There is no 100% way of ensuring that anyone is totally blameless in their character. But we do our best. We check previous convictions, and we do all within our powers as a police service to ensure that those people are suitable to be safety householders.
Hopefully now let's get Cardiff going, and then we'll work from there then. Hopefully it's going to spread. We want it to spread. We want our children to be given back their freedom.
Whatever doubts there might be, Australia now has 86,000 safe houses for children. This is the biggest council estate in Europe. At one time, it was also riddled with crime and criminals. But police and local authorities have been changing the architecture of places like this to remove much of the threat of crime. Half a mile from the centre of Manchester lies the Hulme Council Estate. 8,000 people call this home. Youth unemployment is running at 22%. You are 3 times more likely to be robbed here than elsewhere in the city.
The residents of council estates have been the victims of crime for many years. There's a simple notion that says council estates are equated with the perpetrators of crime. They are more associated, in my mind, with the victims of crime.
Manchester Housing, working with police and tenants, are now attempting to decriminalise Hulme. Bulldozers and cranes have moved in, and many residents have temporarily moved out. For this is a crime prevention redevelopment.
It has been for many years a dangerous place for the residents and a blight on the remainder of the city because of the failures and errors that were made in terms of its design, its construction, its management. Most of the estate was built using what at the time was quite experimental technology. The popular myth at the time was that we would recreate streets in the sky. That's resulted in a number of major problems, both for ourselves as estate managers, for residents and for the police, whereby people who were intent on crime had any number of points of access to those buildings and any number of points of escape. The decks themselves, far from being streets in the sky, were actually very desolate and dangerous places, and it was not unheard of for people to simply break in through the walls of property in order to burgle them.
Now here's a good example of designing out crime, only one break-in 5,000 years. That had a few things going for it though, the curse of the mummy, and they buried the architect and town planner with his work. But I know quite a few community bobbies who'd like to see that brought back.
Manchester architects meet to plan a private sector anti-crime initiative for Hulme.
Architectural liaison is all about. And then we're dealing with different levels of criminal as well. We've got the opportunist who commits about 80–85% of crime.
But Ray Catesby is no ordinary city architect. He's with the police, applying psychology to crime. An architectural cracker.
But basically they're all assessing the environmental aspects to see if they're going to get away with their crime. We, as a police service, have examined in great detail over many, many years with police experience why crimes occur in a certain area and why crimes don't occur in a certain area. And they're very simple, common sense principles. So our unit's role is to make sure that the ones that deny opportunity are designed in, and those that give opportunity are designed out.
There are certain places that it must be hell to live on, hell. And my great plea is that we can analyse where those places are, where people are having really a terrible time, and we want to deploy the police, deploy the crime prevention there.
There has been an education process around these types of areas, the dark alleys on estates, the subways on estates, some of the walkways on estates, the garage areas, and people have been educated out of using those as means of working from one block to another. We can bury our heads in the sand forevermore and say people are criminalising us, people are doing bad things around us. But this is something that we as families have got to do for ourselves. We've got to help these young people.
Criminal damage in progress. But this is not CCTV. It's a kind of home video made with menace to show the machismo of the estates on a stolen camcorder, found only after a police raid on a council flat.
Criminal damage is a huge chunk of the crime figures. I mean, it must be nearly 20%. And criminal damage, a lot of that is sort of juvenile bad behaviour, as it were. And there is quite a lot of work on what criminologists call the broken windows hypothesis. There's a pompous phrase, but it's that if you get sort of signs of crime, you get one broken window in an area, you begin to look a bit run down, nobody mends it, you'll get another broken window fairly soon. Or if the graffiti is all on the wall and it's not cleaned up and it's not in one tidy place that is intended for graffiti, but it's scribbled all over the place.
On the Hulme Estate, the police architect and the city's housing strategist must now remove all the usual crime mistakes.
Well, now here's a fine little alleyway.
Yeah, it's a classic escape route. We've got 1, 2, 3 escape routes from just this area here, and it's very difficult to police. And again, exposed end gables, not lit. Yeah. A right nightmare for anyone to use. A right good muggers alley, and really reduces the quality of life for the people on the estate.
It's the fear of crime, which in many senses is as bad, if not worse, than the crime itself. And so by working to design safe streets, by working to design streets that residents can overlook and control themselves, rather than building estates based on alleyways and ginnels where cars and pedestrians are separated, we're hoping that we can create an atmosphere where people feel safe.
There's a classic example of a remote car parking space, garage areas, not overlooked, vandalised, no one in their right mind had parked the car there. And you can see the level of vandalism, what have you. Yeah, and what, you know, I mean, there's houses over there where they can't get the car outside the front door, and who would leave it here, you know?
As soon as an area starts to look neglected and run down, it gets more neglected and run down, it then becomes a place people avoid, it then becomes a place which belongs only to the criminals.
Yeah, I mean, this is how we prefer to see it, on the hard standing outside the front door, in behind the defensible space. But here it's in a bay, but it's overlooked from the houses, so it's 50 times better than the sort of instance on the old estate where it was remote, away from the front doors and what have you.
As is often the case with local authority developments through the 60s and 70s, we took a street, we obliterated it, and now we're putting it back again. Hindsight is a wonderful thing. We remember how unpopular these blocks were, but the fencing work, although it's starting to show signs of wear, has helped. Previously, you could have walked straight up to people's front windows here, and of course that really added to people's sense of insecurity.
Well, that's the classic example of defensible space around a building, which helps protect it.
Yeah. Trying to create the kind of streets, the kind of housing that people want to live in, that people feel safe in, that people feel safe to use, and that people want to defend.
We don't agree on every issue, but we certainly, in building terms, all have to make compromises. And we certainly, hopefully, have put together a whole package of crime prevention measures, and the regeneration of Manchester is going ahead with a whole host of crime prevention built in.
It's amazing what the application of a little bit of common sense can do, isn't it, really?
Yeah, the transformation is just incredible. Once the community starts to interact, the residents' associations are formed, and in some cases housing cooperatives, where the residents themselves manage it, they start to manage the difficult families, and they start to say to them, you either live on our terms, on our estates, otherwise we'll start using the tenancy agreements, etc., to move you on.
During this series, we've seen many good ideas for preventing criminals from achieving their objectives. But what about stopping them from turning to crime in the first place? We know that a large proportion of crime is committed by a small number of youngsters. This video is now being used to persuade school children that a criminal career is not the answer to unemployment or disenchantment. This is about the reality of life in a British prison, and it is intended to shock.
Take your arms off the counter and move into holding room 2 now.
Screw down going to do now. Bring yourself out here. What are you looking at me like that for? Nothing. Yo! Gooey! What are you looking like that for? Yourself out here. I want your money. You want to be looked after, don't you? Yeah. I could bang you out all over the place in here. You think this is like school where you have little classrooms and stuff like that? Sit down in front of a teacher. It's nowhere like school. Don't get better in here.
No, I normally follow that.
Behind the No Way video is prison officer Paul Wilkinson.
What from the video? Anything from the video that stands out in your mind?
Yeah. He said that you lose your possessions when you go in. I think you'd also lose your friends.
I've done 300 of these sessions, and every time somebody comes up with something that nobody's ever said before.
These children have come not only to see the video, but also to question its inspiration.
Anything else?
Do you ever feel sorry for the prisoners?
I feel sad for some of the prisoners. And one of the reasons I'm here today is that it saddens me to see young people locked up. And I want people to know what it's really like. Because a lot of people don't know what it's really like till they are locked up. It was important that we conveyed the realistic side of prison and that none of it was fiction. And that's exactly what we did with this video. By listening to the prisoners, by talking to young people and trying to tackle their particular misconceptions with the reality of imprisonment, we ended up producing a video that was made by young people, for young people, in a style that young people can associate with these days, as opposed to what somebody of my age might have produced. And having seen it used in the schools, the effect it has on the youngsters it amazes me.
One only had to look round to see that there was probably more or less 100% concentration. Very, very interested. Shock occasionally. I think there was a certain degree of humour, which helped. The fact that they could laugh about issues which were extremely serious. And I think the video itself was not very dry. It was not shock tactics, but at the same time would give them great cause for thought.
Unfortunately, most of the young people in this wing are in for burglary or car crime and drugs-related offences. When you see some 15 and 16-year-olds coming here and they realise that prison isn't what they actually thought it was going to be like, it's only then it's the rude awakening, and then it's too late. All right, young Greenie. And we were particularly concerned about that because there is no satisfaction in locking a young person up. How old are you?
18.
How long have you been in?
Just a month this time.
What do I think about it so far?
Degrading.
Just degrading. I don't want to see young people like you in places like this. I often think that could be my lad I'm looking up behind that door, because I've got a lad who's 18, and for me it's not happening. But for some parent, for some family, for some relative, it is their son, it is their daughter, and it's rather sad. We'd actually closed the young offenders wing here 3 years ago, and we never thought we'd see young offenders again, but lo and behold in 1994 we reopened this young offenders wing.
Obviously there is popular myth that comes from television programmes, and I think it is important to dispel some of the images, the more glamorous ideas that they may have of prison life and of crime. And I think they are issues that none of us are experts in, and I think the fact that I learn along with them is helpful, and we will follow this up tomorrow and of course next week in our tutorial session.
Inmates have come up to me whose sons or daughters have actually seen the presentation, and they've come up to us and said, I wish I'd had something like that when I was at school. And I think it's marvellous that prisoners want to contribute to what we're doing, and that through their mistakes others can learn without making the same mistakes.
Everyone thinks because they've been in prison they're hard and they've got a macho image when they get out and all that, but it's wrong. This is what you should do is get settled down, work hard at school and just get your head together, because this is no life, no way.
People will never ever stop committing crimes. There are bad people. There are people who will do bad things, and I don't think we can actually take that strain out of people. I think we can make it more difficult for them to commit crimes. We can, through education, through advice, through protecting our property and ourselves, deter them or try and convince them that it's not worthwhile doing.
If you want to know more about crime prevention or the stories featured in Crime Beat, there's a CFAX page dedicated to the series. The Crime Beat number 620.